I have to thank you also for the opportunity to present the patient perspective in this workshop, which has been really a fabulous couple of days. The concept of patient-centeredness in healthcare has come a long way since I was diagnosed with breast cancer 20 years ago. And it's been reflected not only in this panel's presentations, but also throughout the workshop. PCORI has increased the focus on engagement of patients, patient advocates, caregivers, and other stakeholders in research. The FDA, NIH, and others routinely include patients, patient advocates, and committees. Patients and patient advocates are voting members of peer review panels. We're now looking at the whole patient rather than body parts or disease pathogens, even given, as Dr. Powers mentioned, it may be lagging behind in infectious disease. COVID-19 has only spotlighted what has long been known. There are multiple disparities in healthcare outcomes, including but not only limited to racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and most visibly older age-related outcomes. We've been shocked by the convergence of the naked exposure of systemic weaknesses in our healthcare systems and systemic racism in our policing and criminal justice systems, which are also related to healthcare. Arguably, despite many seemingly reasonable programs to overcome these disparities, we've only made incremental progress. In introducing this workshop, James Appleby expressed the hope that it will be a catalyst for change. The big question is that change going to be a continuation of the same incremental progress, which hasn't basically changed systems, or is it going to be a sea change addressing systemic issues which have perpetuated disparities? What we've heard in this workshop is encouraging, as it provides wide-ranging update on efforts to improve drug research and development for older adults and the inclusion of older adults in clinical trials, with representatives from industry, academia, NIH, FDA, NCI, and patient advocacy organizations. It shows great progress in addressing failings in and barriers to the inclusion of older adults in clinical trials, the significance of heterogeneity, comorbidities, and polypharmacy in treating older patients, clinical trial design alternatives to the RTC and responses to the challenges of care for older adults during the pandemic. So what's missing? We've been vividly reminded by COVID-19 that the more we know, the more we don't know. This can lead us down the path of ineffectual research away from what matters most for patients. We need to know what healthcare providers are hearing from COVID-19 patients, as well as the needs of the providers to care for those patients. Members of the Advocacy Committee of the Cancer and Aging Research Group and the Association of Community Cancer Centers developed a Qualtrics survey for providers of direct care of people with cancer to examine cancer care providers' attitudes toward the barriers and facilitators related to care of these patients during the pandemic. The survey, which was open from April 8th until May 1st of this year, included 20 items, 3 of which were open-ended questions focusing on the care for older adults with cancer during the COVID-19 pandemic. The purpose of the exploratory qualitative research was to learn about clinical barriers to care, patient questions, and the overall experiences of oncology healthcare providers of older adults with cancer during the COVID-19 crisis. 2 manuscripts, one on the quantitative results and one on the qualitative results, are under review for publication. The findings underscore some of what we've heard in this workshop, especially regarding older patients' attitudes regarding telehealth. Communication between patient, caregiver, and healthcare providers is recognized as vital to optimize outcomes for patients, but it's not always practiced. My personal experience was 20 years ago when I was told by a medical oncologist that I had to have chemotherapy when I questioned the need based on research I had done about my specific pathology. The literature doesn't support that, she said, and she refused to discuss it, though I had raised the question based on studies. Unfortunately, some patients today are still having similar experiences. That is in stark contrast to the doctor who told me once that she couldn't possibly keep up with the literature without the help of her patients who brought studies to her attention. Ultimately, I did not do chemotherapy or other toxic treatments, which might have compromised my immune system. And I believe that's one reason why I'm here today. We need more training and cultural sensitivity and culturally appropriate strategies for better communication, both in the clinic between providers, patients, and family, and in public health messaging. We need more innovative outreach strategies, such as those mentioned this morning. Formal and informal community-based organizations serving distinct populations should be utilized more for assistance in reaching those populations. It was interesting to hear yesterday that in the home-based clinical trial, once patients got past other barriers, getting consent forms went smoothly. Consent forms have been considered onerous and a real challenge in older patient recruitment in clinical trials. My experience chairing a patient advisory board for a PCORI grant that reviewed and tried to amend the consent form for easier understanding is that IRBs are quite inflexible regarding modifications, though there have been experiments with different, more interactive ways of presenting them. It would be useful to compare the home-based CT consent form with the traditional for any differences in content or presentation. In summary, back to the question, is that change going to be a continuation of the same incremental progress which hasn't basically changed systems, or is it going to be a sea change addressing systemic issues which have perpetuated disparities? We need to be bold in questioning systemic causes of exclusions and disparities in healthcare, as well as systemic racism. So much is bound up in ethical issues, and I feel this workshop didn't delve deeply enough into that aspect. Is it lack of will or boldness to examine what remains of dishonesty in clinical trials, lack of transparency, or reporting negative results? Is it lack of will or boldness that these, and a question in yesterday's chat function, were never addressed? The question related to the ethics of the pharmaceutical industry, direct-to-consumer advertising, and the amount of money spent. I challenge every one of us, including myself, to question how complicit we are in perpetuating the fundamental status quo and examine what we can do as individuals to overcome complicity while continuing to address issues and pursue initiatives that have been so well exemplified here. Thank you.